Perfect. So welcome everybody to our very first UndocuAlly training of the 2020-2021 academic year. This is going to be an introduction on supporting undocumented students and students from mixed status households. Definitely, we won't be going into too much detail on a lot of these things, but I think we think it should definitely allow you a space to begin to understand the barriers our students face. Next slide, please. So hello everyone, my name is Daniela. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I am the Dream Center manager, and I've been with the Dream Center for about a year now, virtually, which has been a really, really great experience. I've worked with undocumented students since getting to higher ed, I want to say, maybe starting in 2014, maybe not at a full-time capacity, but has always been part of my work. I was one of the students that advocated for the Dream Center to be established back in 2014, 2015 as a part of the student organization on campus, Dreams to Be Heard. So it's a full circle for me to be back at the Dream Center and be working full-time at the center for something that we've envisioned for such a long time. But yeah, welcome.
Hi everyone, my name is Madison. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Dream Center supervisor, and I've been working at the Dream Center since August 2018. So I've been here for about 2.5 years. This is my third academic year here. I've been working with undocumented students actually since I was an undergrad at UC Santa Barbara. I helped establish our Dream Center there. And I got into the work because I'm also undocumented, so I also like to help out other undocumented students navigate higher education.
Hi everybody, I'm Tessa Copeland, pronouns she, her, hers. I am a staff attorney with CARECEN, Central American Resource Center. I am a part of the CSU legal project team and specifically serve the CSUN campus as well as the Channel Islands campus. My background essentially is that since I've been practicing law, I've always been doing immigration law. But before moving here about a year ago, I was working in rural Nebraska. There's a really large immigrant population there, but not as many not as much access to legal resources there. So I was a part of an organization trying to provide resources in rural areas. So yeah, that's me. I don't know if Veronica has been able to connect yet. Veronica, are you on?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Veronica, and I'm the legal assistant at CSU legal project for CARECEN. And I'm on campus, so that's why I have my mask on. But I am alumni at CSUN, study political science. And prior to that, I was part of CSUN's DC program and helped the immigrant community out in DC, Maryland, Virginia area in CARECEN, DC. And then now I find that that's my passion, and then that's probably because I come from a mixed status family, which I know is a large population here in California.
Next slide, please. So we definitely want to start off by welcoming you all to this space and talk about the Dream Center and what we do. So for us, DREAM is an acronym, and it stands for Dreamers, Resources, Empowerment, Advocacy, and Mentorship. But the Dream Center is basically on campus to provide resources not only to undocumented students, but undocumented staff, faculty, and folks from mixed status families. Our main goals are definitely to help students throughout their educational journey at CSUN to successfully navigate it and feel empowered throughout their journey here at CSUN, and also feel that they received all of the resources that they could take advantage of while being here, while also creating pathways for our students. So not only working with what's already there, but also creating new resources for our students and constantly changing and customizing it to the needs of the undocumented student and mixed status students on campus. So I don't want to read each bullet point, but just kind of giving y'all an overview. Next slide. So before we actually get started into all giving you all a plethora of knowledge, we want to gauge where you all are at, seeing where it is that what kind of knowledge base you're bringing in, or what it is exactly that you would want to learn a little bit more about. So if y'all can go to the link that Madison just put in the chat, or also you can put your camera over the QR code and it'll take you to a Mentimeter. And then we'll go ahead and put it on the screen.
Miguel, can you stop sharing your screen so I can share mine? It looks like people have already started on this.
Good.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead.
I was gonna say, it looks like people are kind of in the middle, like you feel good about like your knowledge, but there's ways to go. And I think according to the curves, it looks like there's, at least for the second one, there's some people who might be around the twos, but pretty much people are in the middle. Do people need a couple more minutes to add on? Okay, people are still jumping on.
Yeah, I think we have 60 participants and we have about 43 people who have participated in it. So I think we'll give folks a couple more minutes, but this is good. Y'all are coming in with some sort of knowledge on undocumented students and mixed status families, which is great. I think we can definitely build on that. Cool. We'll give it about another 30 seconds. In case we have folks tuning in, listening. Okay, this is really good. Hopefully by the end of our presentation, y'all will move up a little bit more in your strongly agree, and that's essentially our goal, but we'll get into that in a little bit.
Miguel, do you want to continue sharing your screen? Thank you.
Which brings us to our UndocuAlly training goals. So we definitely want to provide you all with an overview of the federal, state, and campus policies and how they affect undocumented students and students from mixed status families. We won't go into too much detail because we can definitely get lost in the policies, but we definitely want to just give you an overview of what policies are out there and what resources are available. Also increase your knowledge on the needs, issues, and concerns undocumented students and mixed status households bring to campus. Learn how to create a welcoming space for undocumented students and mixed status households. And also have a general understanding of the resources that we as a Dream Center provide, as well as CARECEN CSU legal project team.
I think it's really important to define the students that we serve. So we wanted to define who falls in the category of undocumented students and mixed status families. Broadly, undocumented means any immigrant who currently resides in the US without legal status, but that can fall into a lot of different categories. So you don't just have to, like you can cross the border basically enter without inspection and not have a status here, but you can also have a visa previously and then expire. And when it expires, you become undocumented. People who have DACA or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals are currently still undocumented. If you've had it or previously had it, you're considered undocumented. And if you're currently in the process of legalizing your status but have not yet been approved, unless you have your green card currently or like some sort of like official visa that's not yet expired, you're still undocumented. And also people who are, it's similar to being in the process, but just people who are still pending a status. So like a lot of people have been applying for U visas. A lot of our students have been applying for like U visas, or they've gotten married. You might hear people say like, oh, I'm not undocumented, I have a U visa. I think it still kind of falls under the category of like, well, you don't have a full citizenship yet or residency. So the access that you have to certain resources are still limited. And that will impact their access to things on campus or things that they might need on campus, like financial aid. And then in terms of mixed status families, we do serve a lot of mixed status students. So those are students who are either citizens or legal residents that have family members who are still undocumented. And then there's also a lot of different ways that students can refer to their undocumented status. The ones that are most common are undocumented or dreamers. Some people who have DACA like to call themselves documented or a DACA student. Sometimes some of our students are not there yet when it comes to like revealing their status. So they like to use softer terms that feel like they're not outing themselves. And it's important for you all to identify what they mean when they say these things, because sometimes if we don't know what they mean, then we can give them the wrong information. For people who don't have DACA, sometimes they call themselves undocumented. And we've also heard the term AB 540 student. This is, honestly, this term was a lot more common and popular pre-DACA. And since we're about 9 years into having DACA now, people don't use this term as much. But this is a term that students, especially you might find like non-traditional students using. I also want to highlight that some people might call themselves a DACA student, but might not actually have DACA because sometimes undocumented students aren't like aware of policies or what they have, but they hear this all the time. Referred to people who are undocumented young people. And so it's always good to kind of see what they mean by that. And in general, stay away from using the word illegal or illegal alien because it can be really dehumanizing or make people feel bad about their immigration status.
So let's get into some numbers. So recently, so many studies have been released about the number of undocumented students that are present, not only in California, but in the nation. So this is data that is actually shared with us through the President's Alliance, which our former President CARECEN was a part of. So there's approximately 92,000 undocumented students in California specifically. And about 52 are DACA eligible students. So that means that there's a large number of undocumented students that don't have access to work authorization and protection from deportations. Specifically here at CSUN, we recently received our numbers from admissions and records that we have about 1,200 undocumented students on campus. But in addition to that, we also have a list of 800 students with undetermined status. Meaning they could potentially be classified as undocumented, or let me rephrase that. They could potentially qualify for certain policies like in-state tuition and financial aid, because from the list that we received from admissions and records, a lot of these students attended a California high school and or community college, but for one reason or another have not been able to establish residency or receive financial aid, which have also created additional barriers for them. But I also want to mention in the 1,200 undocumented students that we do have on campus, that isn't necessarily comprehensive and includes every student, because this is based off of residency. So this is based off of folks who have the AB 540s or who qualify for AB 540 status. It doesn't encompass other students who might be in the in-between stage that Madison mentioned earlier, where they're in the process of adjusting their status, and because of that, they are unable to take advantage of certain policies on campus. So there's definitely a lot more undocumented students on campus, and there's even students that don't qualify for any of the policies, which makes it a lot more difficult for them to navigate CSUN specifically, because they have to pay out-of-state fees, which are significantly higher, as well as not receiving any state aid to help them throughout CSUN. So that means that they would have to rely heavily on outside scholarships or types of funding. Next slide, please.
Sorry, can I add on to that?
Yeah.
I also wanted to add, based on like this graph that we have here, it's important to know that it looks like about only half of undocumented students qualify for DACA. So it's also really important that we consider or try to find like alternative resources that doesn't require DACA to serve undocumented students.
So I also want to provide a little bit more information on mixed status families. There's a lot less information on how many mixed status households there are in higher ed, but nationally, there are numbers that there's about 16.2 million people. And these are according to the IRS, based off of folks that file taxes. So I definitely want to highlight these numbers because although we tend to focus a lot more on undocumented students, there definitely has been an increase in a number of mixed status households that we serve. We usually see more of these students during the time of financial aid. So when it comes to folks' time to fill out their FAFSA application and their California DREAM Act application, we'll see a lot more mixed status students come to us and ask us how it is that they should exactly enter their parents' information because they are undocumented. So I definitely want to highlight these numbers because of the fact that we also have the capacity to serve mixed status households, as well as this is a population that I know our CARECEN legal team has been trying to increase to do a lot more intakes and possibly, depending, obviously, seeing what it is that they may qualify for in order to adjust their status, depending on each case. Next slide, please. Did you want to add something else? No. Okay. We also wanted to highlight the varying racial identities of our undocumented students. I more so want to focus on the graph that says undocumented post-secondary education students to show that yes, there are a large number of undocumented students that are Latinx. However, that is not the only population that there is out there. There's also AAPI, Black students, white, and other. So there's a wide range of racial identities of students. And I know most of the time, the ones that we see highlighted in the media tend to be Latinx students, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only racial identity that identifies as undocumented. But I also want to highlight the DACA eligible for post-secondary education students. So as you can see, most of the folks that do qualify for DACA are Latinx. This is more to, we definitely wanted to highlight this more to say that most of the policies that have been presented and are currently present tend to be more beneficial for the Latinx community and tends to leave out essentially other racial groups because of the tendency that most folks believe that the undocumented student profile would be somebody who is from Latinx descent that migrated here when they were 2 years old or X, Y, and Z when they were young, essentially. But that's not necessarily the case. There's different migration patterns depending on the country that folks migrated from. You know, we have recently also seen an increase in asylum seekers. So there's definitely a wide range of racial identities in our undocumented population, which is super important to take into consideration, because sometimes our biases will prevent us from being able to identify and provide services to our undocumented students. Because if you see a student that identifies within the community of AAPI or Black, and you think, oh, there's no way they can be undocumented, when that's not the case at all. So I definitely want to highlight these things. Next slide, please. Which brings us to our next slide that shows the different countries that our students that we serve come from. So we have served students from different countries and different places, not just Mexico or Central America. So again, these are things to keep in mind when serving undocumented students, because we don't want to allow our biases to determine what type of resources we are able to provide or identify when talking to students. Next slide, please.
So I think it's really important when we're helping out students too, to think about it from an intersectional perspective. And what that basically means, if you are not familiar, is think about like other identities that they may have and how that could compound the experiences or the issues that they face. You know, we talked a lot about like varying racial identities, because that does impact things like how they immigrated here. So that's just like one aspect to keep in mind, but it's also important to keep in mind like gender, sexuality. And I say this because if you are serving like queer students and you're giving resources to them, make sure that it's also accessible to, like, it's accessible regardless of immigration status. If you're serving Black students in particular, they will have issues that other Black students will have, but also face issues based on their status. So it's really important to think about, what do you already know about these identities, and then how can you add what we're going to be talking about here to make your resources more accessible. And it's really important to also know that higher ed resources in general are inequitable and inaccessible to undocumented students. And also having these like different layers of or different identities can add to those layers of exclusion. Many continue to be uncomfortable with their status and will many times not disclose, especially if they already feel like they don't fit this popular image of an undocumented student. So this definitely falls, or this definitely happens for our undocu Black and undocu API students. So again, don't make any assumptions. It's important to introduce like undocumented students to the Dream Center and any communities that will help them. But in general, I think what we want people to know is that anyone can be undocumented, or anyone can have undocumented families. So it's really important to share these resources with all the students that you meet. Next slide. And these are some impactful policies that I think creates layers of access and exclusion for our students. We're gonna go into them in the future slides, and you also will have access to these slides. So you have like a cheat sheet for these policies. But it's really important to know AB 540, like we've been mentioning that a lot, but that's a law that's been around since 2001 and made higher education more accessible for undocumented students because it made them eligible for in-state tuition. And AB 540 is needed to get access to financial aid through the California DREAM Act. DACA is, again, another federal policy that's pretty popular that impacts, again, only about half of our students, but still a pretty considerable population. And then we also talked about AB 5 here because it does impact people's employment opportunities. We're not going to go super in depth with that, but It's a new law that passed in the state of California that limits people's abilities to become an independent contractor. Sorry. And in terms of residency for tuition purposes, I know we talked a little bit about AB 540 here. The requirement it is a requirement to apply for financial aid and get in-state tuition. So you need 3 years of attendance at a K through 12 institution in the state of California. There's been different extensions of AB 540. So here in this chart here, you can see there's AB 540, AB 2000, SB 68. Initially, AB 540 just started out as only counting years in high school to meet the 3 years of attendance, but it's been extended through the K through 12 through AB 2000, and then SB 68 also started to count community college and adult school. But we've been finding that some of the students who thought they qualified for SB 68 haven't been able to access it here. So that's a little bit of a complicated status to try to reach. And then a requirement for residency for tuition purpose also is to get either a high school diploma, GED, associate's degree, or the minimum transfer units from the state of California. And then for the California DREAM Act, this data is from the California Student Aid Commission, which is the entity that oversees the California DREAM Act and the Cal Grant. These are the only financial aid, state financial aid that undocumented students can get. They cannot get federal financial aid, so they can't apply through FAFSA. And I think that's really important to know that there's a lot of people that there's a lot of students that fall through the cracks. So they might know about the California DREAM Act, but they might not be getting aid at the end of the day, and this really impacts their retention here. I really like this graph because it shows that there's 92,000 undocumented students in the state of California. Only 52% of them apply for the California DREAM Act. Of that 52,000, only 22,000 were actually eligible and offered, and only 16,000 were actually awarded the state aid. So these are huge, huge numbers of students who have not been getting financial aid. And honestly, we are trying to figure out the reason. Part of it is because students aren't necessarily submitting all the documents that they need, or they don't know to submit all the documents that they need. But at the same time, there's also a lot of students who were misinformed or are not clear, like the information is just not very clear, because most financial aid, or a lot of when people think of financial aid, they just think of FAFSA. So if we're not giving them the information about the California DREAM Act, then they're just gonna think, oh, I'm not eligible for anything. I don't even know what the process of it is. And so they don't get the financial aid. And if people are not getting financial aid, then they're really, really less likely to stay because they cannot afford it.
I also want to add something else to what Madison said about folks not knowing about the California DREAM Act. So some of the things that we've heard from our students is that when they're either in their respective high schools or community colleges, they'll hear things like, oh, if you have a social security number, you apply for FAFSA, which, yes, it is very true. However, it obviously depends on the type of social security number that you have. So that's super important to also incorporate into your language when providing resources to undocumented students. So making sure that we know to use the appropriate language based off of circumstances, right? And not making an overview generalization like that, because although it is true, that can cause misinformation for undocumented students who have work authorization through DACA and essentially have a social security number. So these numbers are based off of the California state. So this is for all institutions. So like UCs and CSUs and actually community colleges as well. So these are nationwide. So you can only imagine how many undocumented students are awarded based off of each campus if they have significantly decreased as the graph is narrowed more.
Yeah, and I think a good general practice when talking to students, again, it's good to not assume what their status is to talk about FAFSA and California Dream Act. Always say like FAFSA and California Dream Act when talking about financial aid. Next slide.
So this is also a graph to just show you the number of undocumented students present in each institution. So obviously most of the undocumented students present tend to be in the community colleges, but the CSU is among the top 2 of institutions that actually enroll undocumented students. This is to say that it's really important for us to be able to create pathways and access for our students, because in order for them to successfully navigate the university, they need to be set up for success. So they need to be able to access resources through financial aid and others, so that way they could successfully navigate the institution. Next slide.
Sorry, I'm answering the question on the chat. So CADA is the California Dream Act application. Sorry, I know we're using a lot of acronyms. We'll try our best. Go ahead and keep asking us questions on the chat box if you're unsure of the acronyms that we're using. And so, sorry, it got cut off a little bit. The slide got cut off a little bit, but these are the general themes of students that we've seen. I wanted to share like the matrix of access to financial aid and employment. And we wanted to focus, at least this slide is focused on financial resources, because that is the biggest barrier for our students to remain enrolled at CSUN. And I wanted to also show that the horizontal axis is access to employment, and then the vertical axis is students' access to financial aid. So there's a lot of students that have access to financial aid. As you can see, not everyone applies because they don't really know, but there are a lot of students who have access to financial aid. But if they don't have access to a work permit to be able to get a job, they have a harder time staying in school because they don't have other income to supplement the financial aid they receive to pay for their books, their living expenses, maybe their tuition if it's not covered by financial aid. And so it's important to know that the only people who have access to, or like the people that have the least barriers to staying on campus, are people with DACA or have some sort of work permit, and they qualify for financial aid because they have the least financial barriers. But we do see a lot of students who don't qualify for DACA, or they don't qualify for DACA, that don't qualify for in-state tuition. And these are the students that we've been seeing more of. And a lot of times, honestly, we even find them before they're even starting, and they're not even able to be enrolled at CSUN, or maybe they enrolled and they ended up being dropped because they just could not afford it. We've also been seeing students who have a pending status, like they might have a work permit because they have a pending visa, they have a pending U visa or asylum case. We've been seeing a lot more students who have applied for asylum, but because that process lasts years, they have access to a social security number and think they can get maybe financial aid, and then they find out once they start here that you actually have to qualify for in-state tuition to get financial aid. And it's really important to know that a lot of these students a lot of the cases that we've been seeing have been non-Latinx students. and they end up staying because they have a work permit, right? So then they are able to just pay out of pocket, and they tend to be part-time because that's a lot more affordable, but it takes a lot longer for them to finish their degree. And they basically face a lot more barriers to retention and graduation. So once we send you all this information, you'll get a little bit more of an idea of like what each category means. But again, there's a spectrum of people who have more access to financial resources, and people who face more barriers. Next slide. And going off of other issues that undocumented students face besides money, which is a very real issue, the organization or this project called UndocuWisdom defined the undocumented stress cycle. And the undocumented stress cycle is the basic pattern of experiences that occurs repeatedly in the lives of undocumented immigrants. So it's not just like you face one issue and then it's like, oh, it gets resolved, I can go to college now. Like say the example of an issue is like access to go to school. And even after they graduate, that cycle is still going to begin again until they fix their undocumented status, because there's lots of reasons, there's lots of status related stressors. And status related stressors are things like being asked like, do you have a work permit? Or like, can you get a job? Can you apply for financial aid? And those moments tend to be a trigger for undocumented students because they realize that they don't have access to these things. They're realizing the reality of their status and how that creates a lot of exclusions for them. And undocumented students, I know we're talking a lot about like the issues that they face and the barriers that they're challenged with, but they're also very resilient and they find very practical ways of solving these issues. So that's the hustling cycle of it, or the hustling stage of it. And that includes like working an under the table job, or like finding support, finding scholarships to help them pay for college. But it really doesn't, like, even though they find a practical solution for it, it really doesn't change the fact that like it really affects your mental health. It makes you feel like an outsider, like you don't belong, like what's going to happen now if I run out of money. Those are chronic fears and concerns that still plague students. And usually they really need to like find coping strategies to manage and to keep going on in their academic journey or whatever journey that they're currently in. And then it starts all over again, because again, there's lots of different like status related stressors that can trigger this cycle. So mental health is definitely something to keep in mind for our students, because it's also gonna affect their retention and graduation rate. Sorry about the formatting. I think it got like some of the formatting got lost in sharing the screen.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to answer a question in the chat about the 800 students. I'll answer it. Just give me a minute to talk about this slide. So going off of what Madison mentioned about the stressors, we definitely want to specifically highlight additional barriers that individuals without DACA face. Given they have a lack of identification and protection from deportation, limited access to healthcare, they don't have access to unemployment, food stamps, or federal COVID-19 related income assistance, given the current pandemic. They also have very limited access to stable employment and income. Given what Madison mentioned earlier, this is where the hustle comes in, right? They have to work a lot of side hustles or under the table jobs that don't necessarily always are stable. So that they can go up and down in them being able to find employment. And then they also have a higher risk of facing housing and food insecurities. So we got most of this information from the the report that's on the screen. We're also going to share that with y'all when we email you the presentation. We're going to email you a lot of resources, so feel free to look through them. And this is where we got all of our information from. As I mentioned before, a lot of these reports have been published within the last year, which makes it super helpful for us because these are all updated numbers for our students and like barriers they're currently facing. But we definitely, again, want to highlight that I know some of the times the understanding is, you know, if you have DACA, you don't necessarily have a lot of emergencies, or the need for emergency funding isn't always needed. But this is definitely not the case. A lot of the times our undocumented students have learned to cope with it. And this is where the hustle comes in. You know, they've learned to work around these barriers that has allowed them to, quote unquote, be in a stable state of mind, or just being able to move forward and not constantly dwelling on their status. But it's difficult, right? Because it's not always stable whenever things like this happen in the world where they're completely out of our control. And again, most of these barriers affect our non-DACA students who have a really hard time finding employment and stable income.
So how to support undocumented students? There's definitely ways to do it on the individual level and the department level. For the individual level, definitely build relationships with trust and also empowerment. And by trust, I think it's really important for students to be able to even disclose their status or the challenges that they're facing with you. And it's important to make them feel like they're not helpless or that they're like, it's important to come from a strengths-based perspective rather than a deficit perspective. Listen and understand to the student. And I think, sorry, this bullet point is written weirdly, but before responding or before trying to like overwhelm students with so many resources, it's also really helpful to just listen to them and understand what their issues are before trying to give suggestions or like solutions, because it's important to understand the like different complex layers of whatever they're facing. And empathize without feeling pity. Again, a lot of students don't really feel good being looked down upon. They already face the realities of their status and don't want to feel like they're less than. And at the Dream Center, for a lot of the faculty members here, again, it's really important to highlight the Dream Center as a resource for all students. One of the ways to do that is to include the Dream Center as a resource on your syllabi. And if any students do come to you, make sure that you're referring them to the appropriate resources after listening to their concerns. And if you don't know like how to answer a question, again, like referrals go a really long way.
So we also want to highlight we're not done. You go to, okay, perfect. And we also want to highlight some department level changes that can also be made. So build knowledge of resources and policies within the team, within your team, and with students. So making sure that we're consistently staying up to date with information that is being released. And this could be through specifically being on our listserv, on our email listserv, where we can email you information and like any updates on what's going on. Display images that show your support for undocumented students, develop practices that fit your specific college, but also recognizing what practices and policies are limiting for our undocumented students within your department. You know, for example, I know some departments require students to have an internship component. And sometimes that's difficult for undocumented students who don't have work authorization, or even if they do have DACA, because these are federal agencies, our undocumented students aren't able to do internships within these departments. So recognizing these things and being able to create pathways for our undocumented students is super crucial. Yeah, next slide. So we are running a little bit behind on time, so I don't want to go too much into the resource, go too much into this, but just know we do have a variety of resources that we do uh, provide through the Dream Center, through services, events, and programs and resources. So not only do we provide a service to our students by helping them fill out like their AB 540 forms and financial aid forms and providing them appropriate resources, but we also build a community with them. We try to have them connect with one another and understand that there are more undocumented students on campus and that they can have others relate to their story as well. And you know, we try to also insert different types of workshops that we believe would be beneficial for our students, like know your rights and like any policy updates, given the political climate that we've been facing for the last 4 years now. It's changing.
And again, we're running out of time, so I don't want to go too much into these details, but we did want to share some non-DACA resources for you all. These resources are geared more towards generating income or finding some sort of financial stability, because again, that's a huge issue that our students are facing. I think it's really important what's most important that I want you all to take away is that it's important to do a mental shift away from like finding employment, because there's lots of different ways to make money and to pursue a career without like thinking of like, how do I get hired? And just think about it in terms of finding opportunities, and ways to do that are through informal side hustles, freelancing opportunities. Freelancing has become more popular now, regardless of what your immigration status is. Fellowships. A lot of undocumented students also turn to grad school after they do undergrad, because then they don't have to deal with like finding jobs afterwards. Independent contracting and entrepreneurship has also become a more popular way for undocumented students who don't have a work permit to launch their career. And Immigrants Rising is a really good resource. All these links lead to important resources. One of them being the UndocuHustle Hub, which is a website where people can learn or like take online courses that aren't, well, yeah, you can learn how to launch a career without a work permit. Next slide.
And again, just to highlight additional financial aid resources that are both on campus and off campus. You know, as you all know, the traditional academic works website, and also like specific department scholarships, but also off-campus scholarships would be through Immigrants Rising, My Undocumented Life blog, scholarships, and Immigranted, which provides low interest small loans for undocumented students. So this concludes our portion of the presentation. So now we'll hand over the baton to Tessa and Veronica.
Hi, thank you everybody. Again, I'm Tessa Copeland, the staff attorney for CARECEN with the CSU project for CSUN, and Veronica is going to do our first couple of slides.
Hi everyone, again, I'm on campus, so there might be a lot of background noise, and let me know if I sound a little too muffled, and I'll try speaking a bit louder. But again, we're CARECEN, we're the Central American Resource Center, and we have an office in downtown LA and San Fernando. Our mission is to empower all immigrants and help them get a social and economic justice by promoting cultural diversity. And we included our website and Instagram page in case you want to check those out.
Your sound went out, Veronica. I don't know if anybody else can hear you.
No?
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Sorry, also my internet's unstable according to Zoom. But we serve CSU campuses in Southern California, and Tessa and I are part of Northridge and Channel Islands. And our services are right now remotely due to the pandemic, but we serve CSUN Mondays and Wednesdays, and our services are for current students, faculty, and staff in all the CSUs. And that's also extended to immediate relatives, which includes parents, children, spouses, and siblings. Any other family members, such as aunts, uncles, or friends, can go through our main organization, so CARECEN, and we'll provide more details about that later in the presentation. Also, unfortunately, we don't focus on international student visas or employment-based visas, but it's also another subject that students sometimes seek help for. And we also provided our Instagram page for the CSU project. So a little bit about the services we provide. Sorry, it's windy, so you might be hearing the wind too. The services we provide are DACA, which is renewals and initial requests, family-based petitions, which is when a green card holder or a U.S. citizen can petition for a spouse, parents, siblings, or children, naturalization, which is citizenship, special immigrant juvenile status, which is for individuals who are under 21 that were abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents. U visas, which is for victims of crimes in the U.S. who are helpful with the investigation and prosecution of the crime. And VAWA, which is for victims of abuse by an immediate relative who has legal status, and removal defense. And there's a lot more, but those are the main ones we see on campus. And then a little bit about making an appointment. If you're a CSUN student, faculty, or staff, or an immediate relative of a CSUN student, faculty, or staff, we have a booking system. So you just go to that website, click CSUN, and you either put first time appointment or follow-up appointment if you've seen us before, and we'll help you out there. And just make sure to look at the confirmation email because it comes with instructions of what to do. And for individuals who are not relatives or current CSUN students, faculty, or staff, which would also include alumni who we don't offer services to, you can call our Valley office, and the number is below. And also, if you're closer to downtown LA, we provided our downtown LA office number as well. And I'll let Tessa take it away.
Thank you, Veronica. So I kind of realized that I could just sort of jumped in at the DACA renewal stage because that's what most of your questions were about and kind of directed towards. But I kind of want to start off actually with DACA initial. So initial applications for people who have never filed for DACA before, but are eligible now. Under the Trump administration, that opportunity kind of went away. You were only able to renew your DACA, but you were not able to get DACA for the first time. But that opportunity is now back, which is excellent. So particularly for those of you who interact more with freshmen or sophomores, those are likely people who previously were eligible for DACA but weren't quite old enough to apply for DACA by the time the DACA program ended first time applications. So specifically for you, you might be coming in more contact with people who've never filed for DACA before. So that is an opportunity that now exists, which is excellent. Okay, so back to DACA renewals. So just some sort of updates on that. Before the Supreme Court decision came out in June of this past year, we were renewing applications really early, even up to a year, sometimes even a little bit more more than a year early because we didn't know when the decision was going to come out and we didn't know what was going to happen. So it was better to renew early and kind of wait and see than to not have an opportunity to renew at all. However, that rule has recently been changed where you're not allowed to renew quote unquote early anymore. You basically, if it's more than 150 days before your current DACA is set to expire, if you were to submit a renewal at that time, they would reject the application, kind of send back your money and just be like, we can't even look at it, it's too early. So we're only filing within that 150-day window before it's set to expire. Also, there was a brief window where DACAs were only being renewed for 1 year. I'm not really sure why that happened other than just to like screw up the program. But for this short amount, a short amount of time, it was 1 year DACA renewals. The short version is there was additional litigation that reverted it back to a 2-year program. So if you know of any students who received a 1-year DACA, they did get an automatic extension. They were mailed, or should have been mailed at least, a paper notification saying they got an extra year, so for a total of 2 years. And then later on, closer to when that card expires, so closer to the end of that first year, they'll get a new card. So they should have gotten notification already by mid-January, but if they haven't, I would say reach out to somebody, but they should all have that. And then for anybody who had DACA in the past, but it expired, if it's been expired for more than 1 year, yes, they can still renew it. Those cases are a little bit more complicated, but it is possible. Basically, you have to treat it as if it is an initial application. So when you do an initial application, you have to prove that you meet all of the requirements for DACA, including that you have been here continuously in the United States since June 15th, 2007 up to present. So, so those individuals wouldn't have to, basically would have to prove those last, 13 years of presence. So it's a lot of additional documentation. So yes, it's absolutely doable. It's just that there is more stuff they have to do, more evidence they have to gather, more documents we have to submit. So when we have these DACA renewal appointments, what we ask for those appointments is the intake forms. We send them the intake forms, they fill those out to the best of their ability and send them back to us. A lot of times we ask questions that, you know, we ask questions about their entry. So whenever it comes to entry, usually these individuals came in when they were very young and don't really remember, because, you know, who remembers things from when they were a year or two old. So it's okay to like ask mom and dad or whoever is their caregiver for information to fill out those intake forms. We also ask for a copy of their work authorization card, front and back, and a copy of their prior DACA application packet, and that helps us to prepare their new DACA renewal. DACA renewals as well as DACA initials, the filing fee is $495. In the past, we have had some, sorry, my cat is like grooming himself right in front of the camera, sorry guys. We have asked for funding, we've had funding for this in the past through like the California Department of Social Services or sometimes through the Mexican consulate. We don't have any of that additional funding now. So as always, people who qualify for our services, the service itself is always free. So like a current CSUN student never has to pay me attorney's fees, but they are responsible for their filing fee. We have noticed a significant change with regard to how many people are renewing their DACAs when we do or don't have funding. So if we do have funding, either through California or through the Mexican consulate, et cetera, we get a lot of DACA renewal appointments. However, whenever that funding dries up or goes away for whatever reason, there's a sharp decline. So it's very, very clear to us that there's a direct correlation between the funding and people actually renewing their DACAs. And this is kind of scary because if they are not renewing their DACA, a lot of people don't realize, like, once it's expired, you don't have that protection anymore. So people either wait really close to their expiration date or past their expiration expiration date to renew just because they don't have the funds. And that means, of course, they don't have authorization to work, but they also don't have that protection from deportation during that time. So it's important to always renew on time so that it actually gets an approval before your current DACA expires. There's not like a grace period that there is with some parts of immigration. We're also seeing an increased issue with getting that filing fee for people who are filing for DACA for the very first time. So for the very first time, think, you know, these people have not worked before. This is their first time trying to get work authorization. So it's not like they have an income source, even if it's a part-time income source. So it's significantly harder for them to be able to come up with that funding. So, so if you're looking for other ways that you, as a faculty member, as a staff member, as a member of the community, are able to help, helping figure out ways to get filing fee assistance would be really, really significant for this population. All right, next, please. Okay, so advanced parole. So some people kind of know what it is, but kind of don't. So what is advanced parole, first of all? So it's permission for people that are non-citizens to leave the United States and return to the United States lawfully after they've left for a specified reason, for a specified duration. So specifically for DACA recipients, it has to be for one of these three specified reasons. So educational purposes, employment purposes, or humanitarian purposes. So whatever the reason why you're wanting or needing to leave the country needs to kind of fit into one of those categories. Otherwise, the advanced parole is not going to get approved. So so if you're a DACA recipient and you leave the United States and you don't have advanced parole and you're wanting to come back, unfortunately, you've forfeited your DACA status. So you wouldn't have that DACA status, you know, even if you like returned unlawfully or however you get back into the country, that DACA status is forfeited. But if you get advanced parole, leave for a study abroad program, say, and then come back into the United States, not only do you have now officially a lawful entry that can help you for other immigration benefits in the future, you also have retained your DACA status. Next slide. So for advanced parole for DACA recipients, whenever DACA was the attempted termination of DACA under the Trump administration, when all that happened, the avenue for advanced parole for DACA recipients went away. But long story short, lots of litigation. There's always a lot of litigation going on. Advanced parole is now an option again for DACA recipients. So this is wonderful. The processing times for these applications, on average right now, 5 to 7 months, give or take. It can vary widely. So for people who are wanting to do something over the summer, like a study abroad or something over the summer, it might be too late to apply for that, to kind of be sure that your application is going to get a decision before you're needing to leave. But perhaps something in the fall might be a better fit. These applications, what's important to know is that they are they're discretionary. So even if you qualify, the officer who's reviewing your application can say, nope, not approved, whatever reason. Like, they don't have to, so basically, even if you apply, you could be, even if you qualify, you could be out $660 for that filing fee if you're denied. You know, if you, that's a lot of money, especially because all these individuals have also dropped $495 on their DACA application itself, recently. So it's good to keep in mind the cost of things, as well as it comes with its own risk. So even if you get advanced parole, you're approved, you do everything that you're supposed to, you leave the country, do what you're supposed to, and you're returning back into the country, there is always a risk. It's very minimal, but there is always a risk that whoever is reviewing your paperwork to let you back into the United States could say, nope, I'm not seeing that you should be allowed back. So that's always something that's a little bit scary. On top of traveling internationally right now due to COVID, there could be additional restrictions that can kind of come into play even as you're outside of the country. Next slide. Okay, so some general advice for people, like if you're talking to students and wanting to direct them to us. We have a lot of people that sign up for appointments that just never check their emails. So when they sign up for an appointment, they're going to our website, signing up for an appointment for a specific time. An automatic email is generated and immediately sent to them. So sometimes people don't put in the correct email, so they're not going to get the information, and it's going to be hard for us to contact them if we can't, if we don't have an accurate email. Sometimes their emails will go to their spam, but a lot of times they just don't read the emails. And these emails contain a lot of really important information. First of all, they contain the intake forms that we need them to fill out, as well as other important information to get ready for their appointment. So, so if you're talking to somebody about signing up for an appointment and they're like, oh, well, I didn't hear back from them, like check your spam, like check your email. Also, the consultations are private. So we have, attorney-client privilege, we have attorney-client confidentiality issues. A lot of people, especially those who are applying for DACA for the first time, and maybe this is the first time they've talked to an attorney, want mom in the room. It's usually mom, sometimes dad, but usually they're wanting mom in the room because it's a little scary. It's a little scary to talk to an attorney if you've never done this before. You're kind of talking about stuff that you might have been keeping private for a lot of your life, or you don't know the answers to a lot of the questions that you think I'm going to ask, and so you want mom to be there for that to help out. I understand the sentiment of wanting mom there. I always want my mom around, but these consultations are private, and so having somebody else in the room kind of breaks that confidentiality. And we also don't want somebody like hiding in a corner of the room, because that kind of breaks the trust between attorney and client if you're hiding somebody in the room as well. So another thing that I think somebody kind of mentioned in the chat earlier is, what if you're not eligible for DACA or something? Still make an appointment. If you're not sure if you're eligible for a relief, or if you're like, oh, I talked to an attorney a few years ago and I was told I wasn't eligible for anything, still make an appointment. Laws change, situations change. Maybe you weren't eligible 3 years ago, but you're eligible now. It's always a good idea to schedule these appointments. They are free. So it's just a little bit of your time to kind of get some information, see if you're eligible for something. We have a lot of clients that are coming for DACA renewals, or to see if they're eligible for DACA for the first time. They're actually eligible for special immigrant juvenile status, especially if they're under 21 years old. If they're 21 or over, they're not eligible anymore, even if they previously would have been. But that's an avenue to get citizenship. So that's something that somebody, with DACA has been eligible for a while and didn't realize until they actually came and spoke to an attorney, or spoke to Veronica, a legal assistant working with an attorney, to find out that they're eligible for this relief that they probably never even heard of before. So, so that's really important. But even if you're not eligible for relief, it's still good to talk to an attorney. It's still good to talk to somebody who can give you some know your rights information, some safety planning information, and kind of talk to you about some options, or even figuring out options for the future that might apply. And next. All right, any questions? And the chat was really hot while I was talking, and I was not able to keep up with it. So yeah. I'll try to answer what questions questions I can as I read through them, but otherwise I'm done.
All right. I think in general there was just questions on what happens if somebody's DACA expires maybe for longer than a year because they couldn't afford to renew. So can you talk about what happens if there's like a lapse in status for someone with DACA?
Yeah, can we go back to the slide? It's one of I think it's titled DACA renewals. Yeah, so if somebody's DACA has been expired for more than a year, they can still renew. It's just more complicated of a process because we have to treat it as if it was an initial application, meaning we have to prove that they meet the educational requirement, that they came before they were 16, all of these things, and prove that they've been here continuously in the United States for the last 13 and a half years. So there's a lot more paperwork involved than a regular renewal. With a regular renewal, we don't really need much. It's a much more simple process. We kind of need the copy of your work authorization card, and we like to look at your prior application packet so that we're sure that the information is consistent between application times. But for these individuals who their DACA has been expired for a very long time, more than a year, is still possible. It's just more complicated. But yeah, hopefully that answered the question. And then if you have questions, you can email me or Veronica. If it's like students or people that are actually looking for services, email's not the best place to go. We want to actually have a face-to-face via Zoom consultation to kind of dig into the details. But otherwise, you can email us if you have any like direct questions. If you have any topics that you would like me and Veronica to present on, either directly to your department or directly to your class, we're more than happy to do that. So, so definitely reach out if you're interested in that. But otherwise, I think we're ready just to sort of open up for questions.
Before we start answering some questions, we provided a lot of information, so we know it can be very overwhelming. You know, we went from institutional to legal, so it could be very overwhelming. So we'll give you all a minute to just take it all in, but also maybe answering our next Mentimeter just to see where you're at as far as like the information that we provided.
Hold on, sorry, can we go back to the previous slide? So we can just open it up for like questions now, so we'll save the Mentimeter right before we close.
And I'm going through the chat right now to try to catch up on some of the messages. So has there been any outreach to CSUN students regarding the DACA changes? Yes, we had it was actually so large that we had to have 2 additional presentations because Zoom couldn't handle as many attendees, which is an awesome problem to have. So we did that 2 in English and actually 1 in Spanish, because a lot of times parents want to attend these presentations, but it's a lot of legal terminology. It's kind of not really good if Spanish is your first language and you kind of just know English some. So we did it also in Spanish. So there has been that outreach. Oh, and Madison already responded to that, but yeah, just saying what Madison said already. So how long does it take to process? So for the renewals, it really varies. It kind of depends on how early you renew. I'd say anywhere from like 3 weeks to several months. If you're one of the individuals who applied when we were applying early, like before the Supreme Court decision came out, I had some that took a full year to process. It's wild. So it depends on a number of factors, but the average is, a couple months, as long as you're applying within a 150-day window now. And yes, we are planning on having another presentation soon. I think on Thursday. I think it's happening very quickly. Kind of a check-in on the Biden administration thus far. So we'll be at the 50-day mark, so halfway through the first 100 days, just to kind of do a little check-in on like what's happening so far. What do we know? What do we not know?
Profe, did you have a question?
Oh, just a quick question about the juvenile status, Tessa. I think it is important the age, right? You said 21-year-old, so they had to be younger than that. What kinds of things we can sort of watch for a student, especially a younger student, to direct them to contact you and see if they can get that kind of relief? What kinds of things?
Like what can you kind of like notice from a student and stuff? Yeah, yes. Absolutely. So a lot of times, usually what I see is mom is in the picture, dad is not in the picture at all. So if somebody talks about like, oh, I don't know my biological father or something like that, or I was raised by my grandmother, something that's a little different than what we would, the traditional quote unquote household where it's mother and father both involved. So if somebody, that's usually what I see is like, oh, I was raised by grandma or aunt or something like that. Or most common is dad is not in the picture. Another thing that can actually qualify is if one or both of their parents passed away. Under California law, in some circumstances that can be considered abandonment. There's a lot more facts we have to kind of look into to see if that it would qualify, but that's something that you might be able to pick up on if one or both of the parents passed away. If there's any abuse at all, that's something else as well. And neglect is also a weird one because like when I was working in Nebraska, that was a lot of what I would see was neglect cases. So, oh, I've got a great relationship with my mom and dad. They loved me. They did the best they could. But now I live in the United States with grandfather because my parents couldn't take care of me. So like we lived in a tent, or we didn't have plumbing, we didn't have a kitchen. I had to start working at 7 years old in the fields because I had to be able to help provide for my parents. Those are kind of facts that would lead us to think that there could be neglect under California law. To clarify too, so these instances that I'm talking about, the abuse, abandonment, or neglect, could happen in home country or in the United States. It doesn't have to be one or the other. But what we try to tell people is once you turn 21, you're no longer eligible, but you have to get into state court first, and state court is a little bit slow, especially with delays with COVID, them not doing as many cases as frequently. So we prefer if the younger the better, because that gives us more time to be able to get into court and get the orders that we need from the judge and to file what we need to file with immigration. But we say at least 6 months before your 21st birthday. Because if people come to us like a week before the 21st birthday, there's just nothing we can do. Like we can't get the paperwork done, get into court, do all those things in a week. The courts usually book 5-6 months out, depending on what county they're living in. I hope that was helpful.
Cool. Yes, absolutely.
Other questions, feel free to unmute yourselves to ask or drop them in the chat.
I have a question about institutional support. And so this is not a legal a question for Tessa, but probably for Daniela and the other presenters. So prior to the COVID shutdown, I was in a position of where I served as a mentor in my department for our newly transferred students to try to help them transition successfully to CSUN. So one of those students came out to me as an undocumented student. And so I was having regular meetings with this guy. We had very, very deep conversations about what he was going through. One of the issues was he was working. He was an independent student on his own, and then so he was responsible for supporting himself for everything. So he was working at a restaurant, for hours and hours and hours a day. And so that obviously was affecting his performance in school. He was also interested in doing an internship. Our department had an internship program, but this, for professional development in the discipline. But this was not a paid internship. And so he was not able to participate because it was a whole semester long internship. And because it wasn't a paid internship, he couldn't do it. And so all of that were causing him tremendous stress. So I was helping him to search and find potentially paid internships. But then he just disappeared. He just literally disappeared. I've been emailing him. I've not heard back from him, and he's just been on my mind. And for HIPAA reasons, I cannot go asking about him. So what suggestions do you have for us when something like that happens?
That's really hard because there's a lot of cases like that where students just literally cannot participate in a lot of these department and requirements because of their status and because of other responsibilities that they have. So one thing that currently we're working on at the Dream Center is developing a fellowship program that would allow students to participate in leadership opportunities that don't necessarily require them to be through the Dream Center, but also through other departments. So kind of allowing folks to be able to get paid and kind of eliminating that financial barrier while also getting the training that they need in their specific department. But I think that's also something that should be looked at from your specific department, and just being able to identify how they can continue to provide opportunities for students who are in this situation, because it's very common. And it's very common where students just disappear on you because they have other things going on. And then suddenly they'll reappear and they'll tell you, hey, sorry, this and this and this happened, but now I'm in a stable place and can you help me? So it's very common for our students to do that. But I think if you try to reach out to them and like try to keep that line of communication, even if they don't respond for right now, because they hopefully eventually will once they're in a more stable place. But again, just like being able to provide and be creative with our resources within our own departments, and so that way our students are able to participate in things like this they're barred from, essentially.
I think I was also going to say that the student might also be feeling a lot of shame from not being able to, basically from being excluded, even though it's like not their fault. And so if you're also sending emails or like trying to contact them, maybe just keeping that in mind and sending like affirmations of, I know you're trying your best, or like you not being able to do this like isn't your fault. So just let me know when you are ready and I'll be here to help you out. I think something that we've also seen is that it takes a lot for these students to even ask, like reach out for help, because there's so much shame when it comes to their status. And so I feel like even anytime people like reach out to us, I like to acknowledge that it does take a lot of bravery to do that.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
I wanted to kind of follow up on some of the themes I'm seeing with some of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat. So with regard to some of the proposals under the Biden administration, a lot of people are kind of getting, I don't want to say false hope, but more like false impressions of what exactly is going on. And I can't really clarify too much because it's more of an issue of we don't really know what's going on until we actually get direct answers out of Congress, until something is actually passed. So we know what has been proposed. We know that there are proposals for a pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients, a pathway citizenship for people who are completely undocumented, but there is an impression that, oh, that means like this is passing and I'm immediately going to be a citizen. We don't know if it's going to pass. We know that there's a lot of really excellent proposals that are in front of Congress right now. but I mean, we all know that the government doesn't necessarily, like, what is proposed isn't necessarily what ends up being put into action, put into law. So I wouldn't want anybody to rely on that of like, oh, I know I'm actually eligible for special immigrant juvenile status, or my husband can petition for me or something like that. But I'm not going to worry about that because this is going to pass. I'm going to be a citizen through this. That may happen, but it very well may not. We know that there's a lot of back and forth in Congress. And so while there's a lot of great proposals, it doesn't mean that every single one of those proposals is going to pass or pass the way that they look now at the proposal stage. Yes, this current administration is a lot more immigrant friendly than the previous administration, but that doesn't mean that things are automatically going to be passed. So it's really important to keep that in mind. Just sort of keep an eye out on the news, keep an eye out for presentations that we present, that sort of thing. But don't believe that, oh, new administration, that means that I'm getting citizenship. And unfortunately, we're kind of seeing that. Like, of course, we want you to have hope and pay attention to what's going on, but don't, what's the phrase? Count your chickens before they're hatched, whatever. Wait to see into what is actually getting passed, what the final result is. I wanted to mention that. Basically, we're at the proposal stage. It's a hopeful stage, but wait and see what happens then.
So I know we're getting to our time. This presentation is ending at 1:30, but before you all leave, can we go on to the next slide? We just want to know how you all are feeling, what you think about this presentation. And if we can go to the QR code. Hold on, sorry, I have to present it and make it active. Share screen. Please let us know how you're feeling about supporting undocumented students.
And while y'all are filling that out, which I'm really excited to see the numbers shoot up so high already. First of all, thank you so much for coming to this. Seeing that we have well over 100 people signed up for this presentation is amazing, and almost all are faculty and staff. Like, that is really heartwarming and like makes me kind of tear up a little bit, that like just being willing to spend an hour and a half of your time listening to us talk about this is such an excellent place to start. So I'm just really, really happy about that, and really happy that I was assigned CSUN. I love this campus so much. So, so just thank you. We packed a ton of information into just an hour and a half. So there were a lot of things that we kind of skimmed over. There were a lot of things that weren't necessarily in the presentation slides, just because we were trying to account for the time and be respectful of your time, knowing that you've got other things to do as well. This is not your only responsibility. But we definitely want to do this again in the future. We definitely want to have more UndocuAlly trainings, more resources, more presentations specifically geared towards this audience. You've been really engaged, and we really love that. So, so yeah, I'm going to pass back to them. But I just wanted to say that.
Well, thanks for sharing, Tessa. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the same thing. No, it's very beneficial. Thank you all for coming. And I think for your interest in also providing these type, being more informed to be able to provide resources for our students. But I'm happy to see what the closing survey results are looking like, because it seems that a lot more folks feel a lot more informed and comfortable knowing a lot of the, from the information that we presented today. So that's great.
Can I, hello, can I say something? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm really trying hard to copy the chat box. I think there's a lot of incredible information you provided, so I want to commend you on that. I'm wondering if maybe you can send a copy of the chat box to people who might be interested, because there are quite a few links that you don't have on the slide that would be very valuable to share.
I don't know how to do that. Madison and Daniela, do y'all know how to do that and can help?
Yeah.
I can save it.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
about to say, I know that you can click the three dots that are to the
Correct.
right that say more and
Yeah, I
click
don't see
save
'em.
chat.
I'm maybe technologically moronic, but I don't see them when I keep looking for the three dots. I cannot find any three dots anywhere.
Oh,
Where it says everyone, where you have at the bottom of the chat, there is a blue button that says everyone. Go all the way to the right in a straight line, and then you will see a little box with three dots.
Yeah, mine's
Click
not
on it.
showing that. Mine is not showing that. I'm going all the way to the right, but mine is
We'll
not showing that.
send follow-up links. All the links that we sent on the chat, we'll send it in our follow-up emails. And if you have, if there was any other like questions that were unanswered that were shared in the chat box, we can answer it again.
Oh, okay. All right. It would be nice to be able to get it. So I'm wondering if anybody could make a copy of it, and then I could ask for that in an email.
Yes, I can do that.
Great. Thank you so much. It was an excellent presentation.